What is up, guys? Welcome to another video, and today we have some Star Wars The Black Series figures, Echo and Omega. We're going to start off with Echo because I kind of anticipated him more. And here's a good look at the box art, good look at the figure in the box. And pulling him out of the box, first impressions, just visuals. He is looking really good, a really strong presentation. Got a handful of goodies with him as well. So let's take a deeper dive into this figure. Getting into the articulation of the figure, starting with the head region, he can look up and down, move his head side to side, pretty much however you want. A very good range of motion in the head region of the figure. Then getting into the arms, he can, do 360s, kind of move his arm however you want. Just another good range of motion on the body, very impressive. And then when we get to the elbow articulation, he can bring his forearm up pretty well, right before the armor clashes with the bicep. So overall, very nice. And then when we get to the hand articulation with the wrist and whatnot, you can pretty much bend the wrist however you want, and I really like it when a figure does that because it allows you to hold tools and weapons much nicer. And then when we get to the other hand, it's kind of just you can rotate his arm. That's really it. You can't really turn the tool or anything, so just a simple elbow articulation that doesn't really feel limited or anything negative at all. When we get to the torso area, he can do kind of a crunch, not really, not even half a crunch, but he can move his torso. It just feels very limited, and it is unfortunate because so far the articulation of this guy has been really good, but he does have torso articulation nonetheless. Then we'll move to the legs. If you really wanted him, he can sit, but with the comma there, it's kind of hard to do that. But he can do almost a complete butt kick, past the halfway mark, just really good knee articulation. The foot articulation is really good. You can bend it up and down and kind of tilt it so he can do different poses while standing. Next thing I want to cover is Echo's helmet, because you don't put it on like a normal helmet. You have to take the lower part of the helmet and snap it apart and then pop the helmet onto his head. Now you have to kind of wait until you hear a snap sound for the helmet to be in place with his black headpiece, because if it is not in place correctly, the lower part of the helmet will not be able to connect with itself and it will just look weird. So wait till you hear a snapping sound from the black headpiece and the top of Echo's helmet to know that it is firmly in place and you can connect the lower part together. And it took me a while to understand that's what the issue was. I just thought that I had a faulty Echo helmet, which is never a good thought. So eventually I did get it together and I was able to put the helmet all together looking nice. And the only drawback from Echo wearing his helmet is the limited articulation in the head region. He kind of just looks up and down and can do a full 360, but he can't really look tilt his head side to side. And that's really about it. Overall, I think he looks really good with the helmet on. The paint job and the sculpt looks really good. So overall, I really like Echo's helmet and just the execution Black Series did for it. Up next, I want to talk about the unique accessory that comes with Echo, and that is his mechanical arm. It plugs into his peg arm all nice and easy, and it fits nice and snug, so it's not really going to fall off unless you manhandle the figure. And I think the design of it's fine. The paint job isn't too crazy, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. It's nice and simple, but the design of it is very cool, but there isn't really any functionality when it comes to this accessory. The fingers don't bend, the arm itself doesn't really move or extend or anything like that. It's kind of there just for looks, and I'm pretty sure if you found something big enough it will hold it, but this accessory is just more for looks, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, I know we didn't see this in season 1, so hopefully we can see this in season 2. One thing that I really don't like about this figure is that his left hand isn't blaster friendly, or at least blaster handle friendly, because this is his only organic hand he has, so that's the only hand he can use for his blaster, but he can't hold it properly. So I do have a solution to this issue. So basically what I did was I took some nippers and I nipped in between his index and middle finger so that his index finger could fit in the trigger guard of the blaster, and it looks good. And that's pretty much everything that's included with this figure. So before we move on to Omega, I want to go over my final thoughts and just pros and cons about the figure. So starting off with cons, because I like to get that sour stuff out of the way, the first con that comes to mind is the head articulation when the helmet is on. I really like how Echo looks with his helmet on, and it's a real shame that the helmet itself does limit his head articulation. Second con that I can think of is torso articulation. I just kind of wish there was more there. It is kind of lacking, and I'm just kind of sad that there is a lack of torso articulation. And the third and final And the third and final con that comes to mind is the left hand not being blaster handle friendly. I know that Hasbro likes to reuse the hands for all the clones and whatnot, but I feel like they should have, made some sort of arrangement to have Echo's only organic hand be blaster handle friendly, because it's kind of a big deal. It's his only other hand, and I dislike the fact that the finger doesn't go into the trigger guard, where if you look at any other figure that has a blaster handle friendly hand, the finger more times than not fits perfectly into the trigger guard. But I was able to fix it, so there's that. But I shouldn't have to fix it. I just kind of wish that was already there. So honestly, when trying to think of pros for this figure, it was hard to actually think of some, because this figure just does what it's supposed to do. And yeah, it does it really well, but like at the end of the day, it's supposed to have a accurate, good looking paint job. The sculpting's supposed to be accurate and good looking. Like, a figure is supposed to do that. It's supposed to look really good when comparing it to its on-screen counterpart, and the figure does that very well. So going into the pros and basically what this figure exceeds in, and just in my personal opinion, over the years as I've collected Star Wars The Black Series figures, their articulation was always kind of meh, nothing too crazy, and as of lately I've been starting to see an improvement in the figure's articulation, and I don't know if that's something on Hasbro's end, but I can say for a fact that this figure's articulation is really good. Its articulation exceeds a lot of Black Series figures that I've held and still have to this day, and it's just, I think his articulation is really well. I know I mentioned the issue in the torso area and the head area when he has his helmet on, but when it comes to like the limbs, the things that you're probably gonna bend the most, the articulation is really good, and that's something I can appreciate. And the second and final pro that comes to mind is how Hasbro tackled Echo's helmet. Even when this figure was announced and no one had it yet, I always asked how they were gonna tackle that, and I think they did a good job at it. I'm really happy with how that came out. It didn't really compromise the design of the helmet at all, so I think Hasbro did a really good job at that. And despite there being more cons than pros, these are just things that the figure exceeds in or just really stick out to me that I like or dislike. Otherwise, this figure is really good. It has an awesome visual presentation. The accessories and all that he comes with is very cool. I really like that arm, despite it not having much functionality. This figure is overall a very solid figure. These pros and cons are just kind of me being nitpicky and pointing out things that I disliked or really liked about the figure while reviewing it. With Echo out of the way, we can move on to Omega, and just like Echo, the box looks good, the box art looks nice, the back looks good, got a nice description of Omega. If you want to read that, you're more than welcome to. And just first impressions, pulling Omega out of the box, she looks solid, everything looks fine. So let's take a deeper dive into this figure. So diving into articulation, starting in the head region of the figure, she can look up and down, tilt her head side to side, and do a full 360 if you were so inclined, so a good range of motion in the head area. Moving over to the arms, she also has a good range of motion. She can do 360s, pretty much articulate her arm however you want to. The elbow articulation is really good. You can bring the forearm up a good amount, and then the wrist articulation is good. You can bend her wrist, rotate it, pretty much so she can hold anything that you want her to hold. So getting into leg articulation, she can kind of sit down if you really want her to. Her skirt kind of gets in the way, and then when we get to the splits, she can kind of do one. We're past the halfway point but not quite there, and she can do a pretty good butt kick, which is always a good sign for knee articulation. And when it comes to feet articulation, it's good, it's standard. She can bend it up and down and kind of bend it in other ways, so she can do different poses while standing up. Diving into the first accessory included with Omega, and that is her respirator, and you just kind of pop it on her face and it fits all nice and snug. Doesn't really feel like it's gonna fall off. I never really had any issues with it, not wanting to stay on. And you just take it off by popping it off, so very cool. For our second accessory, we have Ruby, which I think is an interesting choice. I'm not complaining when I say that. I just didn't expect that to be included with a figure. I understand why it's with the Omega figure. If you've seen the show, you'll understand why. But it's just kind of out of left field. Like I said, I'm not complaining. It's just, I just wasn't expecting it. But Ruby looks good overall. No complaints. The paint job and the sculpt look fine. So yeah. And for the third and final accessory included is Omega's energy bow. Now this looks good. It doesn't bend or move or anything. It's just one piece of plastic, so you can't move that energy string or the arrow around or take it out or whatever you thought you could do with it. But overall, I think the paint job and the sculpt look fine. I like how there's like the gold and the black and the pink, how it all just looks screen accurate, and the sculpt looks fine. There's little details all around it which look nice, and I just think that this is a good execution of her bow. And spoiler alert, she can hold it just fine. I usually, when I bows with action figures, I get worried about, because bows are so finicky when it comes to action figures. Toy companies are like, oh, we got to make it 3 pieces, or we got to make it 2, or just, multiple pieces, and now the figure needs to hold these multiple pieces. But because this bow is one just piece of plastic, I think it's really easy for Omega to hold the bow, and I think she does it just fine. The only downside I can really think of when it comes to the bow being one piece of plastic is you can't really have Omega holding it in any kind of resting or default stance. You have to have her look like she's always in a fight. And the reason why that might be an issue for some is because me personally, I have all my boys just standing on the shelf, just resting stance all together, and I can't have Omega be holding her bow because, I prefer them to be on the shelves in their resting stance. And that's just one thing that I've noticed, but otherwise I think it's still a good idea that this bow is one piece of plastic, because it makes it easier for the figure to hold the bow and not have the string or the arrow fall out or be all flimsy. And that is everything that's included with Omega. So just some final thoughts, my take on it, and pros and cons. So starting off with cons, because I like to get the sour stuff out of the way. And for our first con, it's more on the subjective side, because I know this is something that people are going to either like or dislike, and that has to do with the bow being one piece of plastic. Now personally, I see this as a pro, because it's a hell of a lot easier now to pose Omega in a fighting stance with the bow, but I know some people aren't going to like this, and I try to keep the pros and cons in a neutral gray area. I'm not giving my personal thoughts when it comes to the pros or cons. That's after the pros and cons. This is just an observation that this is something that people are either going to like or dislike. This is going to have a divided opinion, because I know some people are going to want to put their Omega figure in a resting stance, so where the bow is kind of deactivated and she's just holding on to it, and some are just indifferent and don't really care if they have their Omega standing in a resting stance with or without a bow, and I'm personally one of those people. And besides the bow, that's really the only other con that I can think of. Everything else is fine about the figure. I don't really have any complaints or flaws that I see in this figure. And yeah, and getting into pros, the only pro that I can really think of that's just, an absolute pro, like nothing subjective, is the amount of accessories that come with Omega. Like, she comes with a lot of stuff. She comes with a creature, she comes with a respirator, she comes with her weapon. Like, there's just so much that she comes with, and I'm really impressed with Hasbro's decision to do that. I'm very happy that they did that, and I think it's a very welcome thing, and I hope that as they release more and more figures, they keep adding more and more accessories to these figures. I'm not saying add 50 accessories, but I just I'm spoiled, because I've been spoiled with these accessories. I kind of want more now, and yeah, so a lot of accessories is always good, and that's what we're seeing right here. So diving into my personal thoughts about the figure, I think this is a really good figure. Like I said with Echo, I think Hasbro is really stepping up their game when it comes to the newer Black Series figures, and I think that they're doing a really good job here. This is another example of that. I think the sculpt is fine. I think the paint job looks solid. Very happy with the articulation, and yeah, I'm just very happy with how this figure turned out. And if you are trying to complete the Bad Batch, obviously you will need this figure, but if you're just trying to collect some Star Wars figures and you do see this figure out in public, grab it, because this figure is going to be rare, because Echo and Omega are the last 2 figures needed to complete the Season 1 Bad Batch line of figures, at least for the actual Bad Batch squad. So yeah, with that all said, I'm very happy with how this figure turned out. And this time this size comparison is going to be a little bit different, but here are the 2 figures next to each other so you get a good idea of how tall they are next to each other. And then here is the entire Bad Batch together, all in their Republic armor. I say that because there is an Imperial version of Crosshair, and I do have that figure, but I did want to get everyone put together in the same aesthetic and same vibe, and I think they look all good together. I'm very happy to have this squad completed, and I can't wait to start collecting the Season 2 appearances of these guys, because holy shit, they had to do that to us. And that's it, guys. This is the outro. That was the Star Wars The Black Series Echo and Omega. I think these are really two solid figures. Echo, I kind of seemed like I did nitpick a lot, but there's just so much involved with that figure that of course I had to. And Omega, very solid figure, highly recommend. These figures are going to be extremely hard to find in stores, because these are the last two figures needed to complete the Bad Batch squad, so everyone's going to be eating these up as much as they can before they have to start reverting to aftermarket prices, because I already know that they're going to be vicious. But anyways, with that all said, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, a like and a subscription would be amazing. You don't have to comment, because that's a lot of effort, and we both know the bell is broken. So with all that said, I will see you in another one, you beautiful motherfucker. Everyone, my girlfriend hits me.